So our next panel, coming up is reimagining ownership, future led by horsemen and participants. So there's been a lot of talk as our panelists kind of making their way up. There's been a lot of discussion about where we go with some of the racetrack issues. We don't have to look too far at Arlington and then Hawthorne and others that are struggling, and what's going to happen in the future. And so I think with our panelists, you'll see there's ideas. There are horseman-owned racetracks now. Some may not be aware of that in Nebraska, but reimagining how things go forward, I think we as horsemen have to be a part of that. So we've got a esteemed panel here. We did have a late scratch in Kenny McPeak, who's had some issues with a surgery. He had to go back to Lexington. Peter Eckelberg is going to sit in for him. So we have Lonnie Powell from the FTDOA, Ms. Lynn McNally, the National HBPA Treasurer Secretary, but also the CEO for the Nebraska HBPA, and Fanassi, my friend from South Louisiana, his brother really cooks amazing crawfish, here with the Louisiana HBPA Executive Director, and our esteemed Frank Petromalo, award-winning dresser extraordinaire, steeplechase expert to moderate the panel. So enjoy this last panel. I'm sure the bar will be open when we are done.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. At some point, you want me to turn this off because we're going to leave this. We're going to discuss various business models showing how horsemen can own racetracks or otherwise meaningfully participate in their management and operation to sustain and promote racing. We're going to start with Lynn McNally describing the situation in Nebraska, somewhat unique, where the Nebraska HBPA owns 2 racetracks and partners in 2 casinos. And then we're going to move on to Lonnie Powell to talk about the current situation in Florida, where decoupling horse racing from gaming threatens the existence of racing at Gulfstream and what's being done about it. And then third, we're going to hear from Ed Fanassi, based on his experience in management for 15 years, describe the challenges of actually operating a racetrack. And finally, we're going to end with Peter Eckert explaining some of the legal issues involved in what we're talking about, specifically owning the racetrack. And if we have enough time, I can explain how in Virginia we were able to restart racing after it had been shut down for 5 years. So let's start with Lynn.
Thank you. I would love to say that the Horsemen's innovation and vision was the reason that we ended up owning our own racetracks in Nebraska. The bare fact of the matter is it was a matter of survival. If they did not somehow take over ownership of those facilities, live racing in Nebraska would not exist today. As you know, Exarban was one of the top racetracks in the country. They were thriving. At one point, they had buses coming from the Kansas City area and up north. Their average daily attendance on the weekends was 30 to 35,000 people. They were flush with cash. Every small county in the surrounding area had an ambulance because of Exarban. It was really the heyday of racing in the state. However, in 1995, Iowa legalized riverboat casinos, specifically in Council Bluffs, which is 5 miles from where Exarban was located. From the day those casinos opened, that was the downward slide until ultimately Exarban closed in 1996. The last season, they had assured, for those of you who remember, Bob Lee, they assured him that the $700,000 that was in the purse account would be there and available for the following meet. Approximately 1 month before the meet was to start, they closed and announced that was their money. They took it and liquidated the company. They very quickly sold the Exarban property to several private companies and the University of Nebraska. And the entire racetrack area is now a business park and has several commercial buildings on it. Really heartbreaking. As a result, Bob Lee took our simulcast numbers that were accumulated at Exarban, was public information, had to be submitted to the state, went to a bank and said, I don't have any cash, but these are the numbers that we have from simulcasting. Will you give me a loan? And they did. They started out with $7 million. And with that, we bought a retired garbage dump from the city of Omaha, approximately 56 acres, and open Horsemen's Park at 6032, which is just on the other side of the interstate south of where Exarban used to be. He took out additional loans as we went, and we ended up with a very nice facility. It's a 5/8 mile track, and the building had a kind of a farmy feel to it. And that opened in 1998, and we had run there ever since. Actually, we ran a very small meet there, almost no days, because we were moving all of the revenue from Horsemen's Park to Bonner Park, Columbus, and Lincoln to keep them alive. Those tracks were struggling financially, and they made the decision that Horsemen helping Horsemen, it was more important to keep those tracks open than to run days at Horsemen's Park. Today, it's Warhorse Omaha. That's what it currently looks like. If you look from the top, that building is actually the original building, and we've doubled the building in size, and it looks nothing like it did before, which is probably good, because a month before we gutted the building to prepare for the casino, a film company called Wally Willis, and my boss, the president, and said that they were filming a small independent film in Nebraska, and they were wondering if they could rent Horsemen's Park to be able to film there for a few weekends. And Wally said, well, sure, why don't you go take a look at it and see what you want to do. So they came out and they said, Wally, it's perfect. Our movie is set in the early 90s. We don't have to change anything. A lot of Hunter Green and Burgundy. So, same thing happened with Lincoln. So, you know, we've had Horsemen's Park for 30 years. It was rolling along. Same thing happened at State Fair Park. State Fair Park was in existence for nearly 100 years. Unfortunately, it goes the way of every racetrack, which happens to have between 150 and 200 acres in the center of a large city, and people want it for development. That's exactly what happened to Lincoln as well. They were on the fringe of the University of Nebraska. University of Nebraska is now landlocked, and they wanted to open a large-scale project called Innovation Campus. So they successfully got the legislature to move the state fair to Grand Island. Grand Island also already has Bonner Park. There was no need for a racetrack in Lincoln any longer. Again, we were faced with losing the second largest simulcast market in the state, and we were not sure what to do. We owned Attica at the time in South Sioux City, and so we ended up selling Attica to come up with the down payment for the property that the racetrack is now built on. Ironically, we sold that racetrack to the Winnebago tribe of Nebraska. In 2016, purses were at an all-time low. I think we were running for an average purse of around $4,700–4,800. Not even enough that if you owned your own horses, you could make that work. So we were looking at the very real possibility that there were going to be tracks closing. Two of them in particular talked about, closing in the next couple of years. Lance Morgan, who's the CEO of the commercial arm of the Winnebago tribe, called me in 2015 and said, I've got an idea. Why don't we go try to put a petition on the ballot to legalize casinos, but only at racetracks. I will put up all the money if you agree to let me develop your casinos. You happen to own the tracks in only 2 markets in Nebraska that matter. So if you allow me to build your casinos, I will put up the money for the petition. Sounded good to us because we didn't have that kind of money. The board allowed me to work on the campaign. And so Lance and I, along with his marketing person, collected the signatures, got the campaign going. We failed in 2016 to get enough signatures, so we learned some hard lessons there. I asked Lance recently if he would have done it again if I hadn't asked, and he said no, he wouldn't have. 2018, I called him again and said, "You want to try this again?" It took about a month, but he called me back and said that he was willing to do it. So in 2020, we got 750,000 signatures during COVID. I'm pretty proud of that. And successfully got enough to put it on the ballot, and approximately 3 weeks before the ballots were supposed to be printed, the Secretary of State threw us off and said that our language was bad. We filed an appeal directly to the Nebraska Supreme Court to allow our case to be heard in front of them and bypass all of the lower courts, and they agreed. I am very proud of that case because it's McNally versus Evident. So it's the law of the land in Nebraska right now. So as a result of that, we built both facilities, are both open right now. Warhorse Lincoln is actually undergoing phase 3 renovation, which will double the size of the gaming floor. And actually the image that you see here with the W is actually torn down right now. They took out that entire wall and they're moving the entire thing to the east. We've got approximately 1,150 gaming positions in Omaha, and we will have approximately the same number of gaming positions in Lincoln. Because of the way state law is written in Nebraska, you can only have 1 racetrack per county. So Lincoln will never have competition in approximately a 50 square mile area. Omaha has heavy competition. They've got 3 casinos in Council Bluffs across the river, and they've got an Indian casino just to the north of us. So we're one of 5 casinos in that area, but we're doing very well. For example, in a single month, the Horseshoe lost 15% of its revenue to us. And we intend to keep going until they're out of business. So we kind of like the fact that, you know, they put exorbitant under 30 years ago and we're getting them back now. We've had challenges. This is such a unique situation that nobody kind of knows what to do with us in certain examples. I'll give you a situation we had in Lincoln recently. We also pay for the Horsemen's bookkeeper, and we use the Encompass system, as I'm sure a lot of you do. They would not do business with the Horsemen's group. They said they don't do business with us. They only make contracts with racetracks. So we are actually working through a contract with Bonner Park right now because they refused to do a contract with us. So they said it was a conflict of interest, they wouldn't do it. So that was interesting, but there are challenges like that, but because we own Warhorse Lincoln and Warhorse Omaha, we've been able to really revitalize the racing industry in Nebraska. I think our average daily purses last year were about $18,000, and we'll be going up from there. So we built a 7/8 mile track in Lincoln. We're currently building barns B and C. That's we spent another $6.5 million on those barns this year. And then we're going to be doing the clubhouse grandstand area in the next few years after that in both Lincoln and Omaha. We're very proud of it. We're proud of the fact that we own it, and we're proud of the fact that we have kept racing going in the state of Nebraska.
Check. Hello. I like your style, but
That's Horsemen getting engaged and getting into a tough situation and fighting it through. And that's gonna be my theme, though. I'm not talking about Florida, because everybody wants to hear about Florida. I'm talking about Florida all the time. I want to try to talk about Florida, that broadened it out a bit to how it could be used by other jurisdictions out there. Because unlike some conferences that I've been to, most of you realize, I want to think of, I'm not trying to be critical, but I did the conferences. Just in this past year, I just found it shocking. One conference, one of the big topics was global warming. Well, wow, I'm glad to know that's going to be a challenge for our industry, but how about decoupling first? How about making sure we have an industry to have global warming impact? Went to another meeting, it should have happened 10 years ago. It happened this year. Out of better folding practices. Again, I'm not being critical, good stuff. Total denial of what's going on in the industry right now. It's really easy to look at the happy stuff. It's really easy to think of the good old days, and it's real easy to pretend like certain things aren't happening. I applaud the National HBPA and Eric for, in my opinion, over the last 2 years, is probably having one of the most timely and impactful conference agendas. I'll never take away from my University of Arizona. All right. But I got to tell you, Eric, you got bold. I congratulate you for not going on to other topics that are easy to discuss and fun and not dealing with realities. And I guess my thing would be, more than anything else, it's not time to go negative, it's over, but it's time to get real. And what I mean by time to get real is we can't just sit in our chairs and believe what the other stakeholders are necessarily telling us. I'm going to try to keep my remarks directed to the audience. Fortunately, some of it's going to apply to all of the industry. And by the way, one thing I want to say about a couple of about your organization. I first addressed the National HBPA as an outgoing student of the University of Arizona. He was in 80 or 81. Jack DeFee from Louisiana. I don't think they were termed with us back then. I think Jack was like president for life, but Tony Champlin was the executive director. And we made the cover of the Horsemen's Journal, which was a real big deal for the university. So I want to tell you, he had a big impact on me and a bunch of younger folks early on. And then because mostly I owned show horses, but there were some times I owned thoroughbreds. I've been a member of the Arizona and Washington HBPA. And I appreciate the reason why you're there. I also think you're being compromised a lot these days, not intentionally. It's the nature of the industry, and you're not the only ones being compromised. But I'll get into some of that. Let's talk about Florida real quick. Everybody wants to know what's happening in Florida. When Eric asked me, it was early December, right after my presentation in Tucson, where some of these things I unveiled for the first time in public. Eric asked me if I'd be going here. I said, "What's the date?" And he said, "Oh man, we're going to be in session. This time last year, we were on fire." And the only thing I'll tell you, Mike's here from Tampa Horsemen, he knows what I'm talking about. There's no way I would be here today if the decoupling push was alive and well. Now the session's not over. We technically have a week and a half to go. My budget's going to probably cause it to be extended some, but it looks like, and nothing's a sure thing, and I've already caught some tricky language in some other unrelated bills, but it looks like, I think this will be the 8th time in the 15 years that I've been in Florida that decoupling is not going to pass again. Like last session, it passed in the House, died after one committee. The Senate this year, it didn't even make the Senate. The Senate has no more committees scheduled. But guess what? That battle is not over, because when the day comes and your live racetracks want to tell you about, they want the option to decouple, or they start doing things like, "Oh, we'll run." What's the definition of run? You've been through it. Man, it's time to start thinking really long and hard. And if we, the Horsemen, I know representing breeders, I'm a rarity at this conference in a way, but let's face it, 90% of our issues are the same. Okay? And of the other 10%, there's probably 5% we can compromise on, and the other 5 is just gonna be different, because we're a little different stakeholders, but together as a group, we are powerful. I will say this session versus last session, the press may have told you it was united industry last session, it was not. We had lots of players, we had people stumbling over each other, a lot of non-Floridians, and you couldn't tell the self-promotion from the fact. This year, we got real. Because we predicted, at least my FTUA, we predicted last year that they always going to go. Passed House, no in Senate, no left gut. This year was just a sequel to the same movie. That's the plot twist. We're still not done yet. I expect a plot twist or so before it's over. But I feel good enough about being here today. But the movie last year went one more step. It looks like the sequel's not even going to go to Senate step. But nothing that happened in this legislature will set the platform for us to be prepared for the future. And I'm here to tell you, I can tell you firsthand, no matter what else you hear, it is just the way the business plan is. First racing or Strana Group, however you want to look at it, so I'm going to mention about your industry and live racing have no place in their future. I can assure you. Go to Bangkok. I've been there and been told, granted, usually there's not audiences there to hear it with me, but that's 100%. So, like I asked a lot of national leaders a year or so ago, but I'm here to say, let's pray for California. But I'm also here to say Florida's not going to be one of those. But 2 years ago, I did pose the question to a lot of national leaders. When is a national organization not a national organization? Might that be when they lose California and Florida? I'd say so. I'd say everybody else can meet in the closet in Lexington at that point. Because asked us, the smaller folks are all going to be right. And you know, that's why this is an issue for all of us. That's why I don't understand conferences that don't address issues like this. So, how about some lessons learned? And this is not my 15 years in Florida. I've had the blessing and sometimes the burden of all the age of myself. All 66 years of my life have been in this business. What I figure out, 45 years has been as a coat and tie executive. And, you know, this is just more than a job to me or to you guys. It's a life. And just like I heard some other people talk, I'm 4th generation Horsemen. One of my children's 5th generation. We don't give up easy. But I got to tell you, it's time that we really have to start looking at things. And here's some advice I have to you all. You started out, your organization started out because you represented trainers and owners. You were independent of the racetracks, and of course the regulators are always independent. And you got your horsemen, so there's your stakeholders, the breeders. And yet it doesn't mean because we're independent, we don't work together or have common things. But the day you give up your independence to another entity, and more particularly, at least in my experience, it's been to the racetracks. Understand, half of my career, I'm a racetrack guy at heart. More than half my career has been operating racetracks. But I'm just going to talk to my industry as I talk to it, and that's why I've worked on every seat around the table, because I love the industry. But I got to tell you, independence is the greatest thing you bring to the table. And the day you lose it or delegate some of it away, it's never coming back. And quite honestly, well, that's haunting us in South Florida right now. Advocacy toolkits, you've heard me talk about this in Tucson. If you don't have an economic impact study already ready to go, and any of you were in Tucson 2 years ago, you heard me say, I was very concerned that the American Horse Council study hardly any racetrack participated in it. And my theory was because it had the word horse in it. And if it says horse, it's supporting horse racing. That's an inconvenient truth for any racetracks, not all, but those that want to become just a casino. So have your advocacy toolkit. And if you don't have relationships right now with legislators, it's too late. But I also implore upon you to think about your existing relationships. We've gone through this in Florida. First of all, somebody you think maybe your opponent or has been the quote unquote enemy, you might find times to change. But it's just as hard to learn. Those that you thought were your friends or rowing in the same boat, whether they be stakeholders or organization, they may not be anymore. So you need to reassess. It's not easy, and it's one you got to do not with emotion, but with facts and with evidence. The other recommendation I have for you is when you as a horse group, or just like we as a group, when you get forth with these situations where your tracks don't want to run, or they don't want to revenue share, and you also need to think about replacement, yeah, you're going to look for help. But beware of self-appointed, self-anointed folks that show up and say, we're here to lead you. Yeah, I don't remember how that election happened in my state or other states. And if you do ever engage consultants, so we have, because we have our own bodies, we have our own attorneys, and so if they ever engage consultants, when you're trying to save your own industry, make sure they're going to be all about your own industry and not about themselves. And make sure they have lanes, make sure they have rules, and mostly make sure they are accountable. That would be my advice. I got some ideas on some models. You can shut me off anytime, Mr. Moderator, because I have a few ideas on models that if I'm on permit, I can skip right to one and do the others later. What I want to say is, we in Virginia followed your advice to the T. And later on, I'll get into how we actually got that through legislation. But what you're saying is absolutely. I appreciate that. That verifies it a little bit for me too, because you're known as an old wise man that dresses well and gets awards. So
I'm not that old. Now, there's dirt that's older than I am.
I you know, I've got a few thoughts to consider on models. Horsemen models. If it's our future, who better to look after our future than those of us stakeholders that rely on it, right? We don't have all the options in the world. We can't turn ourselves into a widget tomorrow and pull our range or whatever, right?
I also neglected to mention that I'm grateful to everyone in this room because the one direction that the board of directors gave me was make it impossible or at least super, super hard to decouple.
Yes.
That's all they were worried about. And so we specifically put in the Constitution that it has to be at the track. And we put in our development agreement that if we get divorced from our partner, they're moving out and we're keeping that.
This is excellent because two things that I was going to say, you just hit on one of them. What we have to do if ever we're going to establish future operations, whether that be taking over existing or coming up with our own, we have to make sure that the principal ownership behind it is not going to be motivated to become a real estate deal or a casino only. Then we're just going to go the cycle of decoupling over and over again. Please, this is the only message you hear from me. And our industry and the politicians won't last that long on it. So we've got to start inserting ourselves that way. And the structure's got to be, and you've heard it already talked about, it's a combination of nonprofit, of government, maybe of organizations, but it can't be the typical for-profit dividend paying operation. You're going to get no support from politicians that way. As far as our permit in Florida, real quickly, you've seen it, you've read about it. Those of you in Tucson heard about it. FTBOA, we were very blessed in 2011. We received, at the time, this was the year before I got there, a quarter horse permit. It was to be a nonprofit. Obviously, the quarter horse part was a bit of an issue with us, but there was a provision that said you had X amount of time to convert it to a thoroughbred. And so when I got recruited from the governor's office in Arizona over to Florida, the first thing I got to work on was converting that permit to a thoroughbred permit. My guys as breeders didn't know track economics as well. And so someone said, let's go build a racetrack. And me, I'm the last person in the world who wants to build a failure. We don't need the monuments to our, lack of intelligence or get all emotional about it. So the thought was we put on ice. The racetracks are running a ton of days. We have Calder, Gulf Stream, Tampa. Well, as you can see, last few years, that's changed. We can no longer ride with the Stronach group. We hope they last as long as they can, but boy, you can't plan the future there. As long as Tampa keeps asking to decouple, we'll take them at their word, because anytime somebody says they want the option, that's the way the Stronach group started out with me. You want the option. Then pretty soon everybody says, well, we'll run. What does run mean? Run can mean one race. I don't know what run means. We have a permit. It's nonprofit. It's not transferable or sellable. I don't know how easy that is to replicate in another state, but you have to investigate it in this legislatively. And because of its design, income over expenses goes to purses and breeders' awards and equine research. We've engaged some couple advisors, and what you'd be most familiar with is John Morgan, who has the largest law firm of its kind in the world. And he's a horse owner and breeder, has a lot of horses in Coolmore. His assignment in the entity that was formed for this is to go out and we're going to be come up with an economically viable track. So we won't build one that's not economically viable, but we have a plan and we have some thoughts. And I hope another year get to tell you some more details about those. But right now, South Florida has too many complications. There's nothing in current law unless Gulfstream would be sold for a reasonable price. Hialeah, they surrendered their thoroughbred license back in the 90s. They're decoupled quarter horse. Remember, they went back to racing, half the car would be quarter horses. I don't know if you can find enough quarter horses in the country these days to do a half a meeting. So, with our permit being the only legal one in existing law, we, as breeders and owners, right now, the law has it based in Marion County, the horse capital world. That's the direction we're going to try to go to address our industry's future, very much along the inspiration that you found yourself needing to go in. And I've got lots of other things to say along the way if there's any time for questions. But I guess I would just like to leave you with a thought. This is the time for action. This is not the time just to think. And even if it's just doing a little thing at a time, please, we as horse people, if we want our industry, we've got to be a stronger presence at the table. The other thing I will tell you is just a personal note. Some of the folks in the audience, the executive directors and some of the presidents, I've listened to you for decades. And also have a lot of other good friends out there. And I'm going to say it's been a real pleasure, even though I'm just here for a day, to see you all and see you all still in the industry and trying so hard. You've done a lot to me along the way. So with that, Mr. Moderator, comments.
Thank you. Ed? You're up.
It's all. I'm practically live on that. But we own a racetrack fund. Now what do we do? I can tell you that the unique challenges of a racetrack, you have to be good at all of the traditional business functions that most any business has to deal with, such as marketing, finance, human resources, public relations, just conducting business. The horse racing tracks have many specialized functions that you then deal with at proficient level. Typically, we talk about racing operations themselves. Track surface maintenance is an extremely important neighborhood function of the racetrack. As you have horses that you are responsible for providing safe and effective racing surface that are not going to harm or anything like that. You have to set up simultaneously. And I could go over that with all the minutia of running a simultaneous operation. I'm trying to spare you and just get the height. And then the entire reader processing services are made. And then you'll see each challenge. The racetrack, in addition to the horse welfare that you're responsible for, you have many human beings living on the backside of the racetrack. And they have to be kept in humane and livable conditions. You have EPA compliant. And then, unlike in a small restaurant in the neighborhood, you have an event. And I'll use the fairgrounds as an example. On Thanksgiving Day, people walk in for the first race, 1,100 people want to serve a meal, a Thanksgiving meal. And they don't want to give them the fifth race. They would like the second race. And some of the different departments, racetracks have simulcasting, paramutual, economy, simulcast settlement, event, food, beverage, paramutual, department, money room operations. You have to do something with all the cash that people bring to make wages. And that's a significant undertaking, but properly maintain security on that cash and give it to a bank. And then you have the one that we frequently butt heads with, racing office operation. Some of the challenges. How many businesses are out there that have to make arrangements to remove a large volume of horsemen on a daily basis and do it in an EPA sanctioned manner?
Yeah.
The racetrack services are originally on before. Every morning before training, that crew's got to get out there, properly water the track, properly harrow the track, make sure that it's safe and consistent for the horses. During the break, they have to get out there and make sure that track is working and ready to take the horse. Prior to the race day, you gotta get out there and work the track again. And then every 2 or 3 races, you gotta get out there and work the track again. This is critical to the success of a race. Paramutual out there. When I first went back to the fairgrounds as mutual manager after the fire, we needed 150 mutual folks for that first day, before the advent of something. I had a running total of 75. So I had to hire and train 75 mutual folks, whose very first day of being a mutual folk was Thanksgiving Day at the fair. And we had thousands and thousands of customers. And it was quite a challenge. We did not go well here. Racing. I'm gonna do a little bit to defend, and I'm gonna go back to something that the panel on AI talked about. How AI might be able to help with which races should go. There's one factor that no one's mentioning. Most racetracks, if they do it right, have a budget for the total person they wish to spend in the race. So in addition to setting your levels for your various flavors, for your various allowance races and for your state work, you then have to fill races. And if you par, and I don't know what too many high level allowance races compared to flavors, you can run a person on long for you can. So maybe that racing secretary doesn't hate you when he doesn't use the race that had plenty of horses in it. My horse was great run. And maybe he does hate you, but maybe that wasn't the reason why you offered that allowance race that you followed through. So please keep that in mind. They have to, recruit stages, assign folks. Could your horseman please have your horses? Don't just use the facility to train them. But it's quite an undertaking, and you need specialized personnel who have unique skills and experience to have a good business. Board safety, we never forget. We can't leave cracked boards in the stalls. We can't leave metal jutting out. Where a horse can cut itself open, because then you're gonna make the night news for a long reason. That your facility is not taking care of its responsibility to be following. Compliance and animal welfare. You gotta make sure that all horses, even if, God forbid, someone's not taking care of the horses properly, you gotta step in. You gotta make sure that your facilities for the grooms and hot walkers and other outside personnel, are livable and not, considered to be subpar and inhumane. Clean bathrooms. You tell horror stories about how, bad some of the backside camping facilities here at a racetrack over the course of the week. If the owner of the racetrack is not doing right. And everything's going on great, right? Wonderful, we're doing everything right, we're having success, fantastic. And you notice I'm not even going into the gauging side, because you gotta have qualified people to handle that. So then, here comes the unexpected. I'm gonna tell a little story that kind of underlines the whole reason I took this aspect of it. Hurricane Katrina hit, it peeled off more than 50% of the fairgrounds facility. It was obvious in August, September, we were not going to race horses at the fairgrounds that year. We wound up relocating them to northern Louisiana Day. So management decided they were going to pay the chef, who's extremely talented, very experienced. They don't want to pay him for 15 months to sit around and not produce food. So we let him go. So here we come back 15 months later, we got to get ready for the new meeting on Thanksgiving Day. And someone convinced the president of the track to hire the trainer's son to run the dining room at the fair. And he was a great guy. I liked him quite a bit. He wanted so badly to succeed. He slept in his office for the 2 weeks leading up to Thanksgiving Day, doing everything he could. But he did not have the experience or background to serve 1,100 people within an hour and a half on Thanksgiving Day. It was, I don't want to say it was a disaster, but it was very good. So, well, all of this is taken to is racetracks have to incorporate both the traditional functions of the regular races, and then they have very unique functions that they must. And all of them have got to be staffed with qualified personnel. You can't just take people and say, oh, I always want to be a racing secretary. Let's try this. It's not going to end, well. So, like any other business, make sure, and I'm sure Lynn has come across this.
Couple of times.
You have many requests to give such and such this job, or give them, make sure they have not just the drive to want to do it right, not just the desire to be good at it, they have to have the experience and the capabilities to do these functions, or else you're setting your ways to be up for that.
Thanks, that's pretty much it.
I do feel like I have to bring this to everyone's attention. We literally just made arrangements for manure removal for our meat. And my board member, Gene McLeod, is here and he did it all. He figured it out. He got the containers to put it in. Really, really appreciate it. I've got 4 board members that are hands-on and they have really taken responsibility to help us get this new racetrack off the ground. I'm very, very grateful.
Well, I'm sure that Bob Lee is smiling down and really proud of what you've done.
I don't know. I was just thinking the other day, Ken Sterling, when he really wanted to annoy me, he would call me Roberta.
Bob always had amendments to the bylaws.
Yes.
Every meeting we ever had.
3 or 4 hour bylaw meeting.
Yeah, he was always amending bylaws. But, any event, I've been asked to sort of discuss the various entities that can be used, to get into, getting a track or starting a track or, to get the horseman involved with the track ownership. And so, this is still fact specific, obviously, and state specific because they should have their own, laws and regulations that may apply. But the same, I think, that we've heard from Lynn, from Ron, and Frank is also pointed out is that you have to be really active and proactive with the legislature to know that there's someone there that can assist and help to get the laws introduced and passed that would be helpful for the horsemen and the track. So that is probably number one, is having that contact and that as far as getting the horsemen involved with the track. But as far as the entities that can be used, obviously most of the affiliates are 501 C6 tax exempt organizations, and you all are. And that can be a vehicle used, but you also can explore other avenues that can work in conjunction with the tax exempt organization. You can looking at the functions that the racetrack has. One, you're going to have property ownership, and that one include not only just the real property, but the barns and the grandstand and those offices and other improvements that may be owned by a separate entity where you can, and that could be an LLC, limited liability company, a limited partnership, a regular corporation, or an S corporation. There is the entities that are available, in addition to which you can having the tax exempt. But looking at the various elements of a racetrack, it would which dictates perhaps different types of entities to be involved with the different functions. So the one that we own the property, then could have owners, silent owners, in the partnership or a limited, limited liability company that can be directed by a manager to keep the members not involved and not being directly involved in the management of that company. So that's similar to the limited liability, a limited partnership, excuse me. So that also permits, we can have a different allocation of tax benefits and all the rest of it that can go maybe to the investors where the tax exempt do not need necessarily tax benefits. Like I say, it's real tax specific, so it was something that needed to be really looked at, studied, and given recommendations based upon the class. The operations of the track, which would include the license and the gaming, and that could be held by a separate entity, again, or a regular corporation or a limited liability company or a limited partnership, and that could again pass along benefits and tax benefits, and could be structured in such a way to take advantage of for investors and investors involved, and for the Horsemen's group having the tax exempt entity doing that. One of the other areas that thinking about different things that can be used to attract investors would be perhaps a conservation easement whereby you give up the rights to develop the property, not only keep it as a track or recreational facility, that would then allow for a tax reduction that flows through to the investors, which would basically be the difference in the value of the property as a develop highest and best use, the development of whatever, and the actual, use as a racetrack, limited to that in perpetuity. So that difference in value, could constitute a reduction that may well, generate a large tax reduction that could then be passed along to investors. But it's those types of things that would be something to try to bring folks in. It's again, the starting point there is to make sure that you've got legislators that are sympathetic and helpful to get the legislation passed that will help develop the track. One of the things that we are looking right now in New England, after Suffolk County's closed, our HBPA affiliate in New England has been working to try to get an alternative site and get a track started. And it's not an easy thing because generally you have to get the permission or the approval of the local area where that track's going to be located. And they run into a couple of roadblocks there. They have the investors, they have the structure, they have a lot of things in place, but that final step of trying to get the populace to sign off on the racetrack that carries the stigma of gambling has been a difficult track for them, and haven't given up, still trying, but it's again, that's another part of getting this whole thing off the ground. And then I guess Frank has stepped up and got it done in Virginia, which is a real pleasure to have. Frank, maybe we'll do that.
Yes. Yes, we restarted racing at Colonial Downs in 2019 after being shut down for 5 years. We started with 15 days, and this year we will be running 49 days with approximately $35 million in purses, which averages about $700,000 a day. Now, let me quickly add that about 75% of this purse money comes from HHR machines, which are, we probably get close to 5,000 of them operating in Virginia. And going forward, we have protection for continued racing that's written into our racing unit. Specifically, we have to have 1 day of live racing with 8 races per day, at least 8 races per day, for every 100 machines. So we've got 5,000 machines, we have to have at least 50 days. And probably most importantly from the horseman's standpoint is the horsemen have absolute control over the person. Not $1 purses comes out of any account of the racetrack. We were able to do this for two reasons. One was unity among the associations. Lonnie mentioned this as something before, but when racing was shut down in 2014, we created a nonprofit group called actually it's a corporation called the Virginia Equine Alliance. And what we had was 4 equal shareholders. One was the Virginia HBPA, 2 was the Virginia Harness Horse Association, 3 was the Virginia Thoroughbred Association, which is our breeders association, and the 4th was the Virginia Gold Cup, which is our steeplechasing organization. Well, we formed that, and the first thing that we had to do was get a revenue source. So we went to the legislature, and we got a statutory requirement for a source market fee on all ADW wagering in the state. We had 4. Twin Spires, Express Bet, TVG, and Nitro bets. And of their Virginia handle, 10% goes to the horse. 5% goes to the HBPA based on thoroughbred handle. 5% of standard bred handle goes to the harness guys, and 1% goes to the breeders. So that's all statutory. That comes directly to us. It's in our checking. The legislature also permitted our equine alliance to run off-track betting cards. So we, in short order, set up 4 OTVs in existing sports cars. We went in, we had 2 in Richmond, 1 in Chesapeake, and we forget what the other one, oh, Martinsville. And again, we had revenue sharing with the owners of the sports car, but so we were generating revenue from 2 sources. So that got us going. We were able to quickly reinstate harness racing, but at a venue. We have a county fair track in the western part of the state that's been having harness racing during its county fairs in the summer. We leased that track, put a couple $1 million of improvements to it, and our harness folks have been running ever since. This year, they'll be running 35 days at what we now call Shenandoah Downs. Now, that's being run by the VEA, our organization. That's the track operator. But with regard to the control over purses, it really gives us a substantial control over the racing product. Race days are pretty much controlled by statute, and the purses are pretty much controlled by us. And we have a good working relationship with the racing secretary, and it's probably more cooperative than most of you are used to. It's the racing secretary asking us what the purse account can pay next year. For example, at the end of last year, we're thinking about the initiative for this year, and one of the questions was, can we raise the maiden special to $70,000? So if our books, our projections say yes. And we've been doing that ever since 2019, and we have never underpaid or overpaid purses by more than between $200,000 and $300,000. But again, it's our money. We're just moving it back and forth. But I can't emphasize enough the importance of having unity. When the VEA goes to the legislature, it's speaking for all of the horsemen in Virginia. And that carries weight. And the other thing is, we've had a very horse-friendly legislature. They understand that horse racing is more than gambling. It's agribusiness. And it's a big deal in our state because we have a substantial number of horses that race, but we have an even greater number of horses, whether they're pleasure horses or show horses. So it rings a bell when we go in and say we're horses. So that turns out to be very, very important. But all is not rosy. On the horizon, we have a challenge to maintain the HHR revenue and handle in the light of competition from casinos. 5 years ago, we had no casinos in Virginia. Now we have 5. We have sports betting within the last 3 years. We've had online sports betting. We've got fantasy sports. We've got charitable gaming, and we've also got the lottery. And we now have pending in our legislature a bill to make legal what we call gray games. The the people who own these games call them games of skill, that they're not gaming machines, but they look like slot machines, but they report to actually require skill. And the courts have held that that's baloney, that's illegal. But nonetheless, there is a push because guess what? All of these machines are estimated to be about 90,000 in the state of Virginia. I mean, we get 2 or 3 in a 7-Eleven, convenience store, truck stops, etc. So you're getting a lot of push from the mom and pop folks to say, well, you can't cut away our revenue, even though it's illegal. So it's likelihood that it may be made lawful. The only bright spot is the pending bill of capping at 35,000 statewide. But that, that's still a threat to us because we've only got 8.5 million people in Virginia. And while the median income is fairly high, it can only support so much gaming in a population of that size. But hopefully we'll be able to make out of it. And I think even if we increase the number of, even if the Colonial Downs / Churchill Downs is able to get more machines authorized. Right now we're only 5,000. I think it's going to be tough to do that, but I think we'll probably recognize that 50 days probably makes sense and not many more days because we're in the mid-Atlantic. And I think, have got about 25% of all horse racing in the country in Delaware, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia. And you just can't go on and race year round because there aren't enough horses. So I think our hope to be able to maintain quality racing and maintain horse levels is to come up with some kind of cooperative agreement in the Mid-Atlantic where we don't compete against each other and we recognize that it makes no sense for Pennsylvania and Maryland to be running year round. But those are happy problems to deal with going forward. In the meantime, we're pleased as punch, as we used to say. Anybody old enough to remember we're pleased as punch to continue along doing what we're doing now. We have a good working relationship with Churchill. They came with a lot of baggage and still have it. But they're very professional. They know how to run the racetrack. The problem is dealing with the tension that they have, being a publicly held corporation, between performing for stockholders and doing what's right for racing. The dollar spent on their casino empire returns more than a dollar spent in racetrack maintenance. So guess who gets the product? Who gets the dollar? But we can deal with it. They wound up buying a very nice track, even though it was shut down for 5 years. It was well maintained. So we have a dirt course which is very good. It's a mile and a quarter, and we have a turf course that's 1.1 miles, and it's 180 feet wide with a movable rail. So once a week, we move the rail, and that means that about 80% of our racing staff are running the turf. It gives us kind of a unique market in the Atlantic. But as I say, the real winner here is our ability to create an alliance and eliminate the wars, particularly the wars between standard bred and thoroughbred that you often see in the jurisdictions. So that's my story, and then we can stick it. Any questions?
Any questions? All right, no questions?
One thing it said in his toolbox, one of the big things you have in the toolbox is the economic impact study that you make sure that all the legislators do.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of you got involved in those. It brings in the agricultural industry with you. It brings in whatever business communities your farms or your tracks are at. And it can be reduced down to a two-sided laminated card. And there isn't a Tallahassee staffer or elected official or appointed official that doesn't have at least one, probably several of those. And when you know they're effective, I'm glad you asked me, is my first 5 years, it seemed like, or 6 years in Florida, it seemed like we were doing educating. What got interesting is last week, they started telling us their own stats. And that's when you know your messaging is successful, when they're telling us, did you know you're 34,000 jobs and $3.5 billion in wow, thank you. I saw that story, but yes, it's really important to do it. If you didn't do it with American Horse Council, you need to do it with a university or somebody independent enough, but still friendly enough to show what your business does, it needs to the community. Because otherwise, people will look at you and they don't see you as large of an economic impact and of an infrastructure as you really are.
Thank you, guys. Obviously, the title is Reimagining, and I think that everything you've heard here, a lot of templates that have already passed. Ways we can look at it, thanks to Ed for bringing up the concerns, which are just a logistical reality. One of the things that I wanted to mention to this group who's still here, I appreciate that. Again, a lot of the things that I try to do are bring ideas to the table. This concern being one of them, I brought up to our board, which I can announce here. We talked about it last November. I want to read something to you and then give a little bit of correlation as to where it goes. How many of you have heard of IGRA? IGRA. Okay, the Indian Racing and Gaming Act of 1988. So this is a description of IGRA. Many tribes saw the state governments restricting or prohibiting certain forms of gaming or states refusing to negotiate compacts. The tribes argued that gaming was vital for economic self-determination, especially when others in the economies were weak and inaccessible. Sounds a little bit like they were protecting themselves, right? So what I've started to do is I've looked at the possibility of and the conceivability of trying to develop an IGRA type piece of legislation for horse racing. This is one of the sentences I have. Many in the racing industry argue that horse racing needs a guaranteed statutory framework to maintain purse supplements and prevent states from stripping away live racing requirements. So to me, that's a reimagining what we need to do as horsemen to protect ourselves. Peter and I went through an exercise and our lobbyist in DC. I thought, well, maybe we can have ourselves protected much like a state park. That didn't go anywhere, but I thought about it, investigated it, tried to see if there was something there from a historical standpoint. But having gone to nickel G's for several years in a row and listening to a lot of the tribal gaming issues, man, it sounds like decoupling in several different forms. So I started kind of putting pen to paper, working to see if there's something we can reimagine. But I think that there is something there in creating an IGRA type legislation for horse racing on a federal level. I use the word codify horse racing in perpetuity. So for us, again, National HBPA, we're trying to constantly work to make sure horsemen and horse racing are around for a long time. So you guys being around for a long time, you made it to the end. You could be the first ones at the bar. I'm happy for you. So thank you.